Now, the British Museum has begun the recovery of some of the 2,000 items that were earlier reported stolen.
It comes as China calls for items to be returned that it says were looted. So we're asking today, is it time for museums in this country to return invaluable items back to their home nations, or should they remain here with us? Joining us to debate this, the broadcaster and historian, Rafe Heydel-Mankoo, who says no, they should not be returned.
As well as the archaeologist and former Minister of State for Antiquities Affairs of Egypt, Dr. Zahi Hawass, who says, yes, they should be returned. Good morning to you both. May I start with you, Dr. Hawass, in all of this? When you see that the British Museum has failed spectacularly to keep its antiquities, its treasures safe, does it add weight to the argument that really many of them should be returned to their original home? Can you hear us, Dr. Hawass? OK, we're going to start with you, Rafe, instead, if that's OK. Same question to you, really. Does it undermine our ability to be sort of guardians of these treasures?
No, it doesn't, and that's not to belittle what is an absolutely huge scandal at the British Museum here. And there's also a problem we have with our curators right now that also seem to be rather ashamed of their collections. But artifacts are still perfectly safe. 2,000 objects is a lot, but it's 0.025% of the 8 million items in the British Museum's collections. And we're talking about very small items here, things that could be secreted on your person. We're not talking about the Elgin marbles or the Rosetta Stone going missing. And the reality, of course, is that such thefts have happened all the time in lots of places around the world, the Middle East, Asia and Africa. It's surprising because of how respected and revered the British Museum is. But to think if these items were going to be returned to their home countries, they wouldn't be similarly at risk, especially given the high levels of corruption in those countries, is for the birds. Also, of course, we have to remember the threat from war, from terrorism and political unrest. You remember when ISIS was in Syria, the destruction of Palmyra, the ancient artifacts destroyed at the Mosul Museum. In Egypt, where my interlocutors from, of course, we had a bombing at the Cairo Museum in 2014. The El Arish Museum of Antiquities was very badly damaged in 2015. So they're still far safer and better preserved at the British Museum than in those nations calling for them to be returned home.
But they're not ours, Rafe. And Dr. Hawass, if you can hear us now, that's the main problem. Does it hurt you to see Egyptian antiquities on display elsewhere?
But first, I would like to correct what the minister is saying about corruption. What do you mean by corruption? Corruption can happen in England, can happen in any place. But in my country, there is no corruption. Number two, there was no bombing at the Cairo Museum. There was bombing outside of the... But it is a shame from the British Museum stolen 2,000 artifacts. This shows that the British Museum is not honest to protect our monuments. And therefore, my petition that asking for the return of the Rosetta Stone, it reaches now 200,000 people. It will come to million. And we ask Rosetta Stone to come back because the British Museum is not honest enough to preserve Rosetta Stone, which is the icon of the Egyptian identity.
Rafe, do you want to respond to that?
Bias here is clear for all to see. Firstly, of course, we know full well that the Middle East and Asia and Africa have the highest levels of corruption in the world compared to Western Europe and Scandinavia and the Anglosphere. Every survey on corruption shows that.
I don't understand why do you put corruption? Why do you put corruption in this? It has nothing to do with the shame that you have in the British Museum. Don't talk about corruption. Corruption is the...
Let's move on from that, shall we? Look, the key fact here is the British and the French, particularly the French when it comes to Egypt, but the British more widely, are the people who actually rediscovered the lost history of ancient civilizations like Egypt, Asia and Africa. It was the British and then primarily the French who who translated the hieroglyphs in Egypt, without which we wouldn't be able to interpret any of the wonderful artifacts that are there. And the Rosetta Stone was key to that. You know, these aren't just items for Egypt, these are items for world heritage. I would actually think it's high time for the British Museum to have a new permanent exhibition, not being defensive, but explaining to the world how Britain rediscovered these ancient civilizations, how it saved historic artifacts like the Rosetta Stone. You know how many items in Egypt were being destroyed by looters who were looking for treasures.
Well, let's hear what Dr. Hawass has to say about that.
Listen, I don't understand. He's saying that in Egypt, monument destroyed by looters. What do you mean? Nothing happened like that. I am not denying. Listen, let me finish. You are saying the British and the French did a lot for the understanding the Egyptian monument. I agree. But we are in a case now that the British Museum is not honest enough to keep our monuments there.
Yeah.
If you talk about what's happening in Egypt now, we have the Grand Museum, we have the Civilization Museum. We need the Rosetta Stone to come back because the British Museum is not honest enough to preserve it.
Yeah, and look, you can see emotions running high there.
I don't understand how you are ashamed of having 2,000 artifacts stolen from the British Museum. It's a shame.
No, I have to say, I think it is a stain.
This is corruption. This is corruption.
Certainly accept that, and I can see you feel very, very strongly about that. And Rafe Heydel-Mankoo, I mean, it's harder to argue, certainly harder to argue the case, isn't it, when we have seen this happen right under the nose of the museum? Are they capable of looking after antiquities that other people say they want to own?
It never happened in any museum that something like this has a stop. It's nothing. Never.
Let's let Rafe respond to that, if that's okay.
2,000 artifacts. This is shame.
Okay.
All right. Look, the British. Let's calm things down here a bit. The British Museum is what we call an encyclopedic museum, right? Places like the Louvre, the Metropolitan Museum in New York. These are places where we have world history on display. And they put things like the Elgin marbles, like the Rosetta Stone, like the Benin bronzes into their wider global context where we can actually contrast and compare civilizations. Now, that used to be understood, but now it seems that we're reducing everything to ethnicity and nationalism. I'll be saying that, you know, that museum should only show items that are actually that originate from the location of those actual museums. We're placing nationalism here above internationalism, which is an odd argument.
Well, it is an argument nonetheless, with however odd it is, Rafe. We've got to leave things there. Dr. Hawass, it must be amazing to be you, to be an archaeologist, someone who has uncovered antiquities yourself, and I have been to your museum in Cairo. What is that feeling when you discover something from civilizations 2,000, 3,000 years ago?
You know, it's amazing. I am working right now on the search and the excavation of the lost pyramid at Saqqara, and also for the search of the mummy of Queen Nefertiti. I'm excavating in the Golden City. Major important discovery. When really I discovered many statues, 25 statues in Saqqara, and I see them in a museum. They're going to be shown in the Grand Museum. Our Grand Museum is the best museum in the world. Is going to show all the new discoveries that I made in my career. And I'm really happy to see that. But I feel bad when I hear the British Museum, 2,000 artifacts are stolen. And you know, my petition for it's fair for Rosetta Stone to come back to Egypt, because it is the icon of Egyptian identity.
Dr. Hawass, I wish we could uncover more time. We can't do that. We've got to say thank you to both of you, Rafe and Zahi. Thank you both very much indeed. We're back after the break. We've got the newspaper review.